My name is Rhiannon. I've helped out in Engage and Sunday School for the younger kids, and now I'm here to talk to you guys today about the weakness of a rescuer. This week we are focusing on Judges 6:11 through 40 and 7:7. Chapter 7, verse 7. I would encourage you as a family to, or just as yourself, to read verses 11 through 40, even though we're only really going to focus on a few verses in that section, but it's good to know the whole thing and not just take stuff out of context and do your own research, you know? Alright, so in Judges 6, Gideon found himself in a difficult situation, one where he surely didn't want to be alone. The Israelites had once again committed evil acts against God, and so once again he had raised up another people to discipline his own. This time he is the Midianites. After 7 years of oppression, the Israelites were in desperate need of deliverance. Things were so bad that the people resorted to hiding in caves, and whenever the Midianites saw that the Israelites were planting crops, they would attack and destroy the produce. The people were starving, they were afraid, and they were stuck. That is when God sent word to Gideon that he was about to use him to rescue his people. When God came to Gideon, he made an incredible promise, and he said, "The Lord is with you." This section begins with an angel of the Lord assuring Gideon of God's presence, but then ends with the same promise. Surprisingly, Gideon responded by questioning God's promise. Do you guys ever do that? Do you ever find yourself in a position where you know God is promising you something, you know in your heart that he is telling you there's more to come, and you still ask but is there really? I don't know if you're telling me the truth. That's where Gideon was. If God was with them, then why had he allowed the Midian to oppress them? What is a trial that you faced in the past that you didn't understand? It can be something small, it can be something huge. But how did it affect your faith? Did you grow from that trial? Did you grow from, dealing with a huge issue? Or did you let it break you? Here's the thing, that doesn't have to stay broken. Just like Gideon with his questioning and, everyone has their problems. Gideon questioned God, but God still used him, and Gideon's faith still grew, right? He just needed to see that God was with him, and he was like, oh, okay. And God allowed that to happen because God knew that's what Gideon needed. If you feel like you need something else from God and you just can't understand, and God knows that's what you need, asking him for it is probably the most basic step you can take, but it makes such a huge impact on your faith. Sometimes our difficult circumstances are brought about by our own sinfulness, though. Not because God has been unfaithful. Gideon's perspective shows why God first sent the word of a prophet. He wanted his people to know that they were at fault and needed deliverance. Next, Gideon protested against God's commission on the bias of his inadequacy. He said, I'm the youngest, my family's the weakest, how could it possibly be me? And all God said was, I will be with you. And it's true, that's all we need, is we need God to be with us, and then boom, bada bing, we got it, we're done, we win. This was a reminder that the power of deliverance was not in Gideon, because it wasn't. It was in God, in God's presence. This scene can kind of remind us how Moses responded when God commissioned him. In both cases, the problem is one of perspective. Both Gideon and Moses first looked at themselves for a source of strength and acknowledged their defiancy. But God called them to turn their eyes to him and his adequacy. When it comes to obeying God and following his will, what makes you inadequate or not up to the task? I want you to seriously ask yourself that question. And whatever it is, if it starts with you, doesn't matter, right? God can use the weakest person, he can use the most awful seeming person to us to do something amazing, because God's power is so far out of our comprehension and understanding that it can literally do anything. anything at all. So next up, we're going to talk about the fleece, right? Many biblical commentators observe Gideon's request for multiple signs from God as faithfulness, and they are right. He may have been thinking, did I really hear God right? Am I sure that this is what he wants me to do? And at that time, at this time, and it was for this reason that Gideon asked God for a sign, and then a second sign, even after the angel of the Lord had shown his power, thus validating his message before, verse 20 through 21. We need to see his request for what it really was, unbelief. God had been quite clear in his instructions and promise to Gideon. There was no confusion or misunderstanding, only disbelief and distrust. When have you asked the Lord for some sort of sign to prove you're on the right track? What was the result? Have you ever found yourself in a situation where you really feel like God is talking to you, but then sometimes you talk yourself down and you're like, I don't know. I know personally for me I have, and I do ask God for signs too, because sometimes I'm like, am I talking myself into doing something, or am I hyping myself up, or is this actually God talking through me? And I think as you grow in your faith, you'll see that there are different things that you and God communicate on. You know, there are different ways that you can understand each other. Or, well, mostly you understand God because God understands you. But that's all part of growing in your faith. You can't expect to know someone by just looking at them or just reading about them. You have to have a relationship with them. I mean, how is that going to work? You don't just look at celebrities and know everything about them, right? You read about them, but you don't know what they're personally like until you actually meet them. Because some people you read as nice, then you meet them and they're nasty. And then some people you read as nasty and then you meet them, they're actually nice. You got to grow in your relationship to understand each other, right? So if you want to know what God is saying to you, and you want to know how to communicate with him best, or how he communicates with you, you have to spend time with him in prayer, devotional time, just meditating on his word and talking to him about it. You have to grow. The victory of Israel over Midian is one of the most extraordinary battle accounts in the Old Testament. In Judges 7, verses 1 through 8, God parred the army from 32,000 to 300 men. 32,000 to 300. God insisted that his people see their cause as utterly hopeless, so that they would recognize that their deliverance could only be explained by God's power and mercy. Along the way, God continued to reassure Gideon, and finally Gideon worshiped God as a sign of his faith and trust in God to accomplish his will through him. Not Gideon's will, but God's will. Now to chapter 7, verse 7. How has God brought good from difficult situations in your life? God accomplished a unique and grand victory solely through his strength and wisdom. Even the manner of victory showed that the battle belonged to the Lord and that he had accomplished the victory. The 300 men did not even attack. They pursued after the Midianites were fleeing. But the greatest example of God securing a victory on our behalf through weakness was through the cross of Jesus Christ. God stooped down, put on human flesh, and entered our broken world. The Jews expected a Messiah who would be a military ruler, but instead, God came as a suffering servant to bear our transgressions and be crushed for our iniquities. He did all this to defeat sin and death once and for all. For you know the grace of our Lord Jesus Christ. Though he was rich for your sake, he became poor, so that by his poverty you might be rich. That's 2 Corinthians 8:9. So, as you go through your week and this trial time, this difficult time, some people are still stressed out. Some people are finally mellowing out, but this time is rough, right? What are some ways that God might be using this time in your life to grow you as a person, to grow you as one of his children? What are some ways that you can encourage other people through this rough time? I really encourage you guys to make sure you set aside time to meditate and just be in God's presence. And by meditate, I don't mean like home. I mean literally just sitting still, no distractions, no music, no phone, nothing. Just sitting still, talking to God and listening to what he says, or even taking a verse and just repeating it over and over again, trying to understand what it could mean. God is going to use you in great ways for his purpose. I hope you guys have a wonderful week.